to respond. Mayor will then bring the discussion back to the City Council for direction or action. And so we have item 9A, and Lorena is going to give us a staff report.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before I begin this process, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you Veronica Allen. She is our new management analyst in the finance department. So over the past couple of years since the retirement of our previous CDBG coordinator, you've seen several of the finance staff up here taking the reins of CDBG. Veronica was recently hired, and we hope she'll be with us for many years, and one of her primary duties is to take on and manage the CDBG grant. So I will do the presentation tonight, and then I will pass on the reins to her for the near future.
Well,
So with that, the City of Hemet is an entitlement city of the Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG program, and as such receives annual grants on a formula basis from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. The purpose of CDBG is to carry out a wide range of community development activities directed toward revitalizing neighborhoods, economic development, and providing improved community facilities and services, with maximum feasible priority given to activities which benefit low and moderate income persons. The city is responsible for developing its own programs and funding priorities within HUD and CDBG requirements, as well as monitoring our subrecipients of the funds awarded under this grant. In order to receive CDBG funding, the city is required to prepare an annual action plan and a consolidated plan every 5 years. The annual action plan identifies the city's actions, activities, and resources to be used to address the priorities for CDBG funding during the 2020 program year. The consolidated plan is a 5-year strategic plan that results from the process set up by HUD that assesses affordable housing and community development needs and market conditions, allows prioritization of development needs, and makes data-driven, place-based investment decisions for CDBG funding during the 2020 to 2024 program years. CDBG funds can be used for a variety of activities, including but not limited to after-school activities, child care education, health programs, job training, public transportation, and senior or youth programs. In addition, CDBG can fund public facilities developments or improvements such as clinics, community centers, fire stations, libraries, parks, and playgrounds, and street improvements. The participation of residents, service providers, government agencies, community organizations, businesses, and other interested parties is an essential part of developing the city's annual action plan. It is anticipated that the City of Hemet will receive approximately $893,000 in CDBG funding for the 2020 program year, which will be July 1st, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. Regulations established by HUD for receiving CDBG funding require citizen participation in establishing funding needs and priorities. Information gathered will be summarized and incorporated into the city's 2020 Annual Action Plan draft and the 2020-2024 Consolidated Plan draft. Drafts of the Annual Action Plan and the Consolidated Plan will be available for public review, comment, and a public hearing before final submission to HUD in May of 2020. And with that, staff respectfully requests that the Council open a public hearing to elicit comments from citizens, public agencies, and other interested parties regarding community needs and priorities, that the Council receive and consider all comments for incorporation into the City of Hemet 2020 Annual Action Plan draft and the 2020-2024 Consolidated Plan draft, and that the Council form the CDBG Ad Hoc Committee appointing 2 council members for the 2020 CDBG application selection and funding recommendations.
Thank you, Lorena. Are there any clarifying questions from Council? Seeing none, then I will open the public hearing. City Clerk, do we have any speaker requests for this?
No, Mayor Brown, we don't have any requests to speak.
Okay. We have no request to speak, so I'll close the public hearing. Do any members of the council have any questions or comments at this time? Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion on item 9A to form a CDBG ad hoc committee and nominate council members for the ad hoc committee.
That's a motion.
Okay, so your motion is?
I will make a motion that Michael Percival and I be the ad hoc committee.
Okay, do I have a second?
I'll second it.
A second by Bonnie. Please vote.
And Michael can chair it. Chair. Not chair, chair.
Okay, moving on to item 9B, a public hearing to
Thank you, Council.
consider calling a special election, declaring the results of the election, and approving formation and levy of special taxes for City of Hemet Community Facilities District number 2019-01, McSweeney Barron.
Good evening, Mayor. Congratulations, and members of the City Council as well as members of the public. The item before you tonight is the second part of a two-part process regarding the formation of Maintenance Community Facilities District for the McSweeney Development Phase 2. On October 22nd, the City Council took the first step in the process of forming the district to initiate proceedings and its intention to establish Maintenance CFD number 2019-01 for McSweeney and to levy and collect assessments against lots and parcels within this district. This project area, as indicated by the picture above, is located on the southeast corner of Dominigoni Parkway and South State Street, and is projected to include 1,351 single-family units at its build-out. The following slide is just an aerial view of the proposed CFD formation. The purpose of the CFD and forming CFD 2019-01 will be to cover the costs associated with the maintenance of public improvements, including streetlights, pedestrian lights, landscaping, inspections of stormwater facilities and BMPs, litter and graffiti removal, all other services necessary or useful or in connection with authorized services listed above, including building a reserve fund for replacement, and also to levy and collect the special tax to fund these activities. Notice of tonight's public hearing was published in the Press Enterprise, a newspaper of general circulation, on Saturday, November 30th. As this is the formation of a new district, any opposition or support from the parcel owners expressed to the use of ballots, which were mailed to the property owner 10 days prior to this evening's hearing and were to be returned to the city clerk. I believe the city clerk has received these ballots. It's staff recommendation that we continue with the public hearing to take testimony, if any, regarding the formation of Maintenance CFD 2019-01, and to ask the city clerk to count the ballots and announce the results of the vote, and if the ballots result in a majority affirming the assessments, to adopt resolutions and ordinances associated with the formation. Chris Thomas, our consultant from Harrison Associates, is here with us tonight, and we would be happy to answer any questions from the council prior to the opening of the public hearing.
Any questions from council? Seeing none, I will open the public hearing. City Clerk, do we have any speaker requests to speak on this item?
No, Mayor, there are no requests to speak.
Okay. With that, then I will close the public hearing. And Deputy City Clerk, are there any return ballots for the special election on District 2019-01?
Yes, Mayor, there is one that was received. And I will open that. There was a ballot return, but there was no vote.
Well. Now what? And we only received one.
Is there a Pat Parker in the audience?
So, Council, what we've received is a consent and waiver agreement, which is part of the packet, along with a property owner appointment of authorized representative. That would be Pat Parker. Consent and waiver of appointment of the representative to vote. Description of all of the parcels represented by the owner, along with the appropriate boundary map and the list of the parcels. Unfortunately, the ballot is included, and it's not marked or signed by the representative. So that means that you will have to continue this public hearing into January until the authorized agent can sign the ballot, unless they're here and can be reached and get here by the end of our session tonight. So if staff thinks that can happen, you can continue this and put it on the very end of your agenda tonight, or you can continue it until your meeting in January. But as it stands, we have no vote, no ballot.
I'll move that we continue this item until the end of the meeting tonight or the next earliest council meeting, whichever is appropriate.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second that we continue this item. First option being to the end of tonight's meeting. And
If we could, is it possible, Chris Thomas from Harrison Associates, if we could continue the public hearing to a date certain to the next city council meeting, that I'm sure we can get that ballot back by then. So I'm not sure which is the next city council meeting that we'd be able to do that.
January 14th.
So if we could continue it to date certain of January 14th, that'd be great. And we will have that ballot signed.
Council, if you can make your motion to continue the public hearing open, they don't have to re-advertise it.
Okay.
I think technically that means, Mayor, you have to reopen the public hearing, and then you would continue it open. You don't have to, but then they've got to put out all of the notices again for the public hearing.
So, based on the request from the applicant, I will amend my motion to continue this item with an open public hearing until our just January 14th council meeting.
And I will second the amended motion.
Okay, do we need to open before we vote?
Yeah.
So I'll reopen the public hearing on this item and request if there's any comments from the public on this. And seeing none, no, we'll continue it. Continue with this item. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to continue this public hearing to a date certain of January 14th, 2020. Please vote. And that passes unanimously. And that takes us to item 10, discussion and action items. First item is 10A, recommendation to authorize the finance director to pursue financing options with financial institutions for the replacement of fire apparatus and authorize purchasing to solicit bids for the apparatus from apparatus manufacturers for the replacement of one engine and one aerial Quint fire apparatus. We have Fire Chief Scott Brown here to give us the staff report.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. I have the honor to introduce one of our operations battalion chiefs, part of our management team, Greg Lloyd, 20-year veteran, the City of San Diego, and will be actually presenting the actual agenda report. I'd like to cue this up with a very brief discussion on the agenda, broad-based, give you a background on how we ended up here tonight. It's important to underscore that the city's traditional process to replace our aging fire apparatus has been primarily via the Vehicle Replacement Fund. That fund has not kept pace with our need to replace our apparatus and other emergency response vehicles. For fiscal year 1920, the balance in our vehicle replacement fund of over $700,000 was reallocated from the fire vehicle replacement fund to assist the city's budget. In doing this zeroed out our fire department's funding base for such purposes. This created an opportunity, and we worked very closely with our city manager and finance department to look at other ways of achieving the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and that was to replace our aging apparatus. So that opportunity to look at our current business model on how we allocate, how we purchase large capital outlays such as fire engines, fire apparatus. And unlike a sedan vehicle SUV type, these cost between $600,000 and $1 million plus, so they're very large purchases. We needed to identify both the funding process and funding sources. Those will be identified in the presentation you're about to receive. I want to highlight of the current frontline units are 5 engines, 1 brush, 1 squad, 1 truck. 2 engines have been replaced, engine 2 and 3. 4 utilities have been replaced. They'll be replacing our squads that are currently frontline. That'll be for Medic 1, Medic 2, and also replacing 2 utilities, one of which will be used as a battalion chief command vehicle backup. We've parked one of those units, and again for our residents and members in the audience, in front at the end of the meeting, you'll see one of the F-250s that I'm referring to that was purchased via Measure U. We have 3 remaining frontline engines that have been identified for replacement. Engine 1, Engine 4, and Engine 5. And I do believe you received a copy of an assessment that was conducted by our fleet services. I asked our team there to give me their recommendations in terms of order of replacement. Engine 1 has $184,000, Engine 4, $188,000, and Engine 5, about $150,000. Fleet Services has made the determination that out of those 3 engines, Engine 5 replacement can be deferred. I support that. They determined that we could get approximately 3 to 5 additional years out of that engine. Our plan is to cycle Engine 5's replacement as part of next year's budget. I want to focus very briefly on the aerial apparatus discussion that you'll be receiving here shortly. The background is currently our truck company, our ladder. And I was remiss, and Greg, if you can help me with this. We have a sign for both the council, and I'm going to put this up here for, if everybody can see this here. The board, just to give you a visual of what we're referring to. Currently, the truck that we have is known as a tractor-drawn aerial. That truck is stationed at Fire Station 4. It's cross-staffed, which means does not have dedicated staffing assigned to it. And its availability is predicated on Engine 4 crew being there at the station. When we have a structure response, that crew moves over to the truck. That's referred to as cross-staffing. That is not optimal. Problems with the current cross-staffing model: reliability. Availability of the truck is predicated on the engine crew being available. Training. Truck requires additional specialized training. And the current location places the truck 5 miles from our primary target hazard, that being the hospital. It's important to underscore that both the standards of coverage report that we commissioned very early on in my tenure here that presented to the City Council in 2015, and the standards of coverage analysis, which was conducted and completed in 2018, identified the need to relocate a truck company to Station 1. One other element that is important to consider is ISO, Insurance Service recommendation that determines and establishes insurance rates. The ISO recommendation is ladder companies be placed a minimum of 2.5 mile intervals in areas over 3 stories in height. Presently, the truck, as I indicated, at Station 4, Hemet Ryan, and that is 5 miles to the hospital. I'm using 5 miles as the ground zero, if you will, for the primary target hazard. The majority of commercial properties and building over 3 stories are located in the downtown core area along Florida Avenue. In Station 1 area, we have 4 high-rises, high-rise defined as 75 feet or higher. In Station 2 area, we have 1 building that meets that criteria. Station 3, we have 3. And Station 4, we have 1 designated high-rise. As part of our 10-year Measure U staffing plan, priority was given to fund full-time staffing for the truck. And this included relocating the truck, our existing truck that we have now, to Station 1. In the very first year in 16-17, to create a light force concept, we'd hired staff with an engineer and firefighter, and the truck would respond together with Engine 1 as a response module. That's referred to as light force, and would incrementally, we would move towards achieving the captain's positions in year 2. That did not occur for a number of reasons. We were not able to develop any kind of consensus with our labor group. They're an important part of this discussion. In year 3, for this fiscal year, it was deemed that we simply can't afford the addition of 9 full-time equivalent positions to staff the truck. So the decision point for us, the opportunity for us to continue to try to achieve dedicated staffing for the truck is not a reasonable expectation. The $1.3 million in approximate dollars fully burden is an ongoing cost that we have to address. Cost escalators, the PERS cost, MOU pay raises make that increase significant over a longer period of time. So that is our opportunity. That is why we're here tonight. This has been an 8-month process to get us to tonight. And that is the opportunity to change our business model. Everything that we've done to date, we've completed every major milestone as part of our Measure U 10-year plan, with the exception of the truck company staffing. I made the decision as your fire chief, the business decision, that we needed to look at the business model. We need to focus on the outcome that we're trying to achieve, and that is to get aerial coverage, truck coverage downtown, and look at other aerial platforms to include Quint aerial apparatus. If you look at the bottom of the picture board, on the top is what we have currently. It's the 100-foot aerial TDA, tractor-drawn aerial, and down below is the Quint aerial apparatus. To engage our apparatus committee, including community stakeholders, to ask one question, answer one question, and that was what I gave direction to our management lead, who oversaw that effort. Will the Quint aerial apparatus work in our city? That was the only task that they were given. With that, we engaged through my contacts the city of Riverside, the city of Murrieta, and the city of Anaheim, who have similar like vehicle types. Those chiefs were very gracious to provide not only staff, their time, as well as the apparatus, to have our personnel be involved in evaluating and seeing firsthand how those vehicles work. That was a several-month process. It included a very comprehensive driving course to assess performance, and I want to put that in perspective. Their areas, each one of those vehicles has their pros and their cons, and with them comes the most important: can they access, or their limitations. I will tell you, in my 41 years of experience, that I've been a captain on both a TDA as well as a Quint. In my old organization, there were areas that both those vehicle types were very challenged. The way you deal with that is develop very comprehensive tactical fire planning, pre-fire planning, the routes in, for instance, where you spot the apparatus, those types of things. Our training chief is working very diligently to address a number of those shortcomings, but I share that because each one of these vehicles has their limitations, and it's very, very important. There's a term for the Quint. It's a Swiss Army knife, and it really can do a lot of different things. But with that, The original findings that we received back from the committee as follows, and I'll read directly. I believe you have a copy of that report, but at the very end of that report, November 21, I believe is the date of the original November report. If direction from fire administration is to move forward with the purchase of an aerial quint, then the following recommendation is made, along with the unanimous recommendation that this unit not be staffed and operated out of Station 1, rather be staffed and operated out of Station 4. I will gently and respectfully share with you that that was not the task to recommend where that would be placed. We went into this discussion with a very, very strict edict, and that was, number one, will this vehicle type work? And again, staffing it at Station 4 deviates from both the recommendations found in the standards of coverage, community risk assessment, as well as the deployment analysis. And that's important as that is the basis for all the decisions for us that we've considered as part of our business model that we've been working on the last 5 years to rebuild our fire department. So let me leave you with this. Our position, management's position on this is the funding for 9 full-time positions. That would be 3 captains, 3 engineers, and 3 firefighters. Is again, as I indicated, estimated to be $1.38 million, is not fiscally sustainable. I had very direct discussions with finance and our city manager. The long-term goal, we can't afford it, bottom line. That's very difficult for your fire chief to say this because I certainly, if given the opportunity, we'd love to do that tomorrow. The reality is that we cannot afford it. Absent ability to fund positions, our business model needs to be reevaluated, and that change to reflect looking at different options, including the quint. The following outcomes, service enhancements still remain the same. We need to get a truck of some sort downtown. We need to maintain fire suppression capability. We need to establish truck capacity as identified in both reports, and improve reliability and availability of truck responses on all fire responses. By staffing this with existing staff, replacing Engine 1 with the truck quint apparatus, that'll allow us that reliability and I believe enhance and improve our stated goal of improving our fire service response. So with that, again, would like to introduce our Battalion Chief Greg Lloyd, as I indicated, a 20-year veteran of the San Diego City Fire Department, who's been part of our command team for nearly 2 years now, and he'll go over the details of the agenda report, and at the end, we'll be open for questions, if I may proceed, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief.
Okay.
Yeah, I think City Manager would like to make a few comments before you go.
Certainly. Thank you, Chief, for providing that background. I just wanted to provide a couple other items of background, too. You'll recall that prior to the adoption of the fiscal year 1920 budget, we did have conversations related to how the city makes large capital purchases. And one of the things that the Measure U Committee had recommended and included in their letter for expenditures for fiscal year 1920 was that the city explore the use of financing for some of these large capital purchases. The council did also provide that direction to staff, so that's why we've brought this forward to the council. We didn't want to get too ahead of ourselves. We didn't want to allocate a significant amount of time in delving down this path if it's something that the council didn't want to continue pursuing. So with that being said, we wanted to make sure that we brought this to the council, not in terms of having authorization to move forward with this purchase, but just to provide the direction on whether it's something that the city would continue to explore and go out to bid and get some potential costs on that, or if it's something that the council doesn't want to continue exploring. So that's why we felt that the timing was right to bring this item to council so we can get direction from the council. So with that being said, thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Mayor and Council, thank you for this opportunity. The proposal or the report set before you has 3 recommended actions before that. The first one being that authorize the Finance Director to pursue financing options for 2 fire apparatus. That would be 1 engine and 1 aerial quint. The next one is to authorize finance to spend up to $415,000 annually under Measure U for 5 years, so the loan would be for a 5-year term. And then the last one would be to authorize purchasing to solicit bids from fire apparatus manufacturers for the replacement of 1 engine and 1 aerial quint apparatus. So just to go through what we want to talk about here is just some of the background. I want to give you a little bit of education on the differences, a little more about the three different types of apparatus that we've been talking about, that Chief Brown has been talking about, our current fleet that he's also talked about, the term frontline versus reserve, and that's something that you might hear. We'll go into the purchasing versus financing, and then just one little end piece on custom fire engine that I want to provide a little bit of education on. So this is what everybody sees. It's what we have the most of. We currently have 5 frontline fire engines. We have 2 in a reserve status. This is an engine. We call them engines. They carry hose. They carry water. They pump water. We carry one of those at every fire station. This is a truck. So although a lot of people use that interchangeably, we have a very distinct. A truck is something that carries ladders, carries tools, carries specialized equipment. It is a large toolbox, and we use that. It carries extrication equipment. It carries basically various tools to be able to do anything that we need to do to be able to serve the citizens, rescue people, remove them from harm. That one does not carry any water. It does not carry a pump. One of the ways you can tell that is that there's no real outlets to connect hose to. This is a quint. So a quint basically carries both water and hose. It is an abridged complement of both. It is kind of more of a jack of all trades type of apparatus, but it gives greater capability. It not only carries an aerial ladder, it pumps water, and it also carries hose as well. What this does, as we were discussing earlier, the largest advantage of this is it allows for a permanent staffing of a truck company. We're no longer cross-staffing as fast as that we can be. There is a delay when we move one crew from one piece of equipment to another piece of equipment, when they move all their gear and all of those things. So we want to be able to provide permanent staffing, have that increased capability and reliability. Also, if that engine is out running a medical aid, that truck becomes unavailable as well. So that would be another positive for that. Our current situation, the current number of apparatus that we have are over 10 years old is 6. Current industry standard is 10 years is a great lifetime for a frontline engine, and then it moves into a reserve status for the last 5 years, and they say 15 years is the total lifespan of a fire engine. At that point, it becomes more costly to repair than it does to actually replace. The number of apparatus that we currently have that are greater than 15 years old are 3. So that is engine 1, engine 4, and reserve engine 3251. You can see the mileages on them, 185,000 miles, 190,000 miles, 183,000 miles. Our engines run a lot of calls. They're on the road quite a bit. And so what we're looking at is really being able to replace those 3. Now, we would love to replace all 3, but as the city manager mentioned, we want to do this incrementally. This is something that's a business change, and we don't want to, as far as comfort level, we want to make sure that we go at a pace where everybody feels comfortable with it, and we're not going too far. So, although we would like to replace 3, we'll start with 2, and then look forward towards that 3rd moving forward as we progress through the next fiscal year. The chief mentioned that the vehicle replacement fund that we currently use, previous was reallocated as to help balance the budget for FY 19 and 20. So we talked about frontline versus reserve. Now this is somewhat of a misnomer because our reserve apparatus are kept in a state, they're not used as much, but if a frontline apparatus goes down, then we use a reserve rig and it becomes frontline. So although we say we're not going to use it as much, it could very well be used in a frontline state at a moment's notice. We don't like to have any gaps in service, so having reserve apparatus ready and available allows us to basically limit any gaps in service should an engine go down for any type of a mechanical issue. The other thing that's very important for us with having reserve apparatus is for surge capacity. So if we have a disaster, a large wind event, a flood, a fire, we have the ability to recall all of our personnel here, but we need to have equipment to put them on. I happened to be part of San Diego during the 2003 Cedar fire. And the biggest problem that department had in 2003 was engines. They had people standing, waiting to go fight fire, but they had no equipment to put them on. We were sending people out in pickup trucks and Suburbans with hose and hydrant wrenches in the back. And that was a wake-up call for that city. But to have that surge capacity, to have equipment available for our folks to be able to fight fire during disasters or large-scale incidents, that's another poignant reason to have a reserve fleet available for us. And currently we have two. We have two apparatus that are in a reserve status. So the proposal is to finance the purchase of one engine to replace the high mileage apparatus. You know, the apparatus run $600,000 to $1 million, you know, as far as what you're looking at. We're looking at an engine company, $650,000 about the base, $75,000 to put outfitting to make sure that everything's mounted appropriately. With tax and everything, we're running in about $738,000. Put that in with a Quint, $1.2, $1.3 million. We're talking about a $2 million expenditure, which for a city to do that all at once is difficult. And then if we end up, you know, spending that money, what happens to the rest of the city? Do all the departments go without for a year while the fire department gets their apparatus? And so we're looking at those different business models. And so the one was to finance the purchase of an engine and an aerial Quint, so that we can replace an engine. So what would happen is engine one would be replaced with a Quint. So that would take care of the place of one engine. And then in the next fiscal year, we would purchase another engine, or plan to, so that then we would have those three apparatus. So all of our frontline apparatus would be less than 10 years old. And then when we would be able to have, to move some of those other apparatus to a reserve status, so they would be more reliable in those cases. So this is what it looks like. So right now, if we were to gauge between annual percentage rate of financing versus the annual price increase, fire apparatus manufacturers increase their equipment, the cost of their apparatus every year, and it ranges between 4.5% to 6.5%. It all depends on the cost of materials, what's the cost of manufacture, or whatever their costs are. But whatever costs they have, they pass on to the customer every year. And so talking to the apparatus manufacturers, it's pretty steady between a 4.5% to a 6.5% increase. E1, one of the apparatus manufacturers, had a little bit of an anomaly, and they went up 6.8%. But there's no standard. There's nothing that's going to tell you, oh, it's always going to be this. It's kind of up in the air. So it's really important for us for a way to kind of smooth out what that cost is going to be. Having a constant interest rate is something that's more advantageous. We worked with finance, and one of the quotes they got for an APR was 3.1%. So even at the low end of an average annual price increase, we're still more than a full percentage point below what it would be for an annual, if we were to save up for that apparatus. So for one aerial and one Quint, the total cost, including tax, would be about 2.093 for 5 years. We have $200,000 of Measure U funds already set aside for a down payment on the finance, which would bring our total cost down to 1.8 or just under 1.9. That gives us an annual payment. Apparatus manufacturers run an annual payment, not a monthly payment, so it's once a year. That payment starts 1 year after you sign. So it's not like we wouldn't pay until 1 year after we sign a contract. We would get that first apparatus probably in about 9 or 10 months, so there'd be 2 months before we'd actually have to pay on something that we received. The annual payment and then the total cost of the loan would be just over $2 million. That total interest paid over the term of 5 years would be $152,971. If we were to save for that apparatus and taking into account the annual increase, we would, have to save not for 5 years, but for 6 years. So that would ends up giving us about an additional $302,000 that we would have to spend in order to be able to purchase both of those pieces of equipment. Now that's based on setting aside $409,000 a year. With our current, with the apparatus, the vehicle replacement fund, we were setting aside roughly $200,000 a year. So if we would have to either double that or double the amount of time saving. So we're not catching up. We're still constantly behind with those price increases. The difference runs at about $289,000 savings to the city by financing over trying to save over time with that. So the last one, and I just want to talk about this, the perception reality, I'll throw this one in for you, is that this idea of custom fire engine. And this is what I think a lot of people think of when they think of custom fire engine, right? They got that's looking at that. The perception versus reality. The reality is that 95% of all fire apparatus are custom made. I've been to the apparatus manufacturers. They start at the very beginning of the assembly line with 2 frame rails, 2 steel frame rails and an axle. It comes that way because that's just how they manufacture the apparatus. We're really not talking about customization. We're really more talking about standardization. For our firefighters, it would be really difficult for them to say, okay, in this cabinet on this engine, this is where the chainsaw is, but in this engine, it's in this cabinet, and in this engine, it's in this cabinet. And when lives are at stake and adrenaline's high, we want to have everything in the same place in every piece of equipment. So it's really not customization, it's standardization. And then based on that, as we talked about earlier, our specifications, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. You know, a specification for a fire apparatus looks about this thick. It's about 200 pages long. And it goes through everything from braking systems to axle types and everything in between. So what we do is we go from partner agencies, Anaheim, Riverside, Murrieta, we take their spec, and then we look at what are those things that make it standard for our department, make minor adjustments here and there, and are able to then come together with a product that has been tried and true, but will also work for our members on that. So with that, I don't have anything else, but if there's any questions that you have for me or the fire chief, please feel free.
Council have any questions, clarifications from staff? You reach for the mic first.
Thanks for the report. I have a couple questions. So the recommendation that you're making, Chief, is for this Quint to be stationed at Station 1 to replace Engine 1. So I've got some questions. The out of Station 1 is the busiest station in the city, correct? And currently we have an engine and a medic unit. And because it's the busiest station, the medic unit can't handle all the medical calls, so I'm assuming that the engine is responding to medical calls as well. So here's my concern, and this is not just my concern, but this has been a complaint from councils before me about sending a fire engine with 500 gallons of water and all that weight driving through our narrow streets and city streets to respond to medical calls. So if the recommendation is that we replace engine 1 with a Quint, that Quint is going to then essentially respond to medical calls as well, unless we're going to staff another.
If I may.
So
good question.
I'm going to go on a limb and say that I'm going to assume this Quint weighs more than an engine does, even though it's got less water, but it's got a bigger ladder and it's going to be bigger and longer. So my concern is that in the downtown area, the roads are a little narrower. They're not in the best shape, and we're going to have a heavier, longer Quint handling medical calls. Not all the time, I realize that, but still, that's going to be responding to medical calls. So that's one thing. So my concern is the weight of the vehicle in these areas, the wear and tear on the vehicle, the wear and tear on the roads, because that's all going to cost. And then secondly, as far as the financing component of this, I'm not opposed to financing, but I would like to see us, we've got $11 million sitting in Measure U, just sitting there. I would like to see us finance it with Measure U and pay Measure U 3% as opposed to paying Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase or whoever we would finance. If we've got the money sitting in Measure U, we'd be better off financing it with Measure U and paying the interest back into Measure U when it can be used as opposed to paying a commercial bank. Those are my beginning thoughts. So I will let you
No, I want to make sure that I answer your questions, and thank you for no nozzle questions. There's some history there, so I thought.
We're not talking about those. I do have a fire harvest type thing.
Yeah, I had to take the moment to lighten it. Thank you for indulging me on that. So with your question regarding, this council's made it very clear their concern about sending fire engines to medical aid calls. That's the legacy system that we inherited. I've been very clear that it's not the system that we designed. We have an opportunity here to change the model, and that paradigm started with putting in service a 2-person squad vehicle to run medical aids. We would not even begin to have this discussion if it had not been for your approval and support of putting a 2-person squad vehicle in Station 1 to respond. That has made a demonstrable impact, positive, on reducing the workload on the engine. That has allowed them to do other things. Obviously, it's bettered the system in terms of reliability. The intent with the Quint, and again, the double-edged sword here, we cannot afford 9 full-time positions for dedicated truck staffing. So we have revisited the business model. We'll staff it with the existing staffing we have at ones. The medic unit, the medic squad, Medic 1, will take the primary response role for medical and EMS calls. They do that now. About 3-to-1 is roughly the ratio. And we think that's a good plan. We have a part-time peak demand unit. And those are, in my view, I call them force multipliers because they allow for better flexibility to use the engines where they really need to be focused on. So that addresses the concern you have. There will be occasions where that Quint, as it does now, with the engines, will have to take a backup call. 45% of the time when engine 1 goes on a call, 45% of the time there'll be a chance for concurrent or back-to-back call where we have to bring other stations in to cover the area. So it's, again, the priority that we're still moving forward is we got to not only take care of the response model, the business model, but also how we're dispatching. And so EMD is part of that component. There's many layers to this. So that's one. Number 2, I appreciate your comments with Measure U. The intent of this is to be funded by Measure U. And the balance that we have, here's an idea of our fiscal priorities, strategic priorities: replacement of our communication systems, emergency response vehicles, our safety equipment, and infrastructure. I've got nearly $1 million of deferred maintenance for all our fire facilities. The need to replace Station 5, McSweeney, that's on the horizon. So there are other things that we have to take into account. So it's a balancing act. I believe strongly that what we have before you achieves that balance. It's fiscally responsible, and I think it's a good move in the right direction, addressing the very issue that you pointed out, that we're going to change it and redistribute the workload accordingly.
Thank you. I was looking at a report. I mean, you had commissioned a committee to run through, and you gave us part of that report about doing the course and driving these vehicles. As far as the vehicles going through these courses, was the truck that we have currently better suited to get through the roads and the areas through?
There were some areas, and I'll just put the 10-ton elephant on the table. Either vehicle, there are areas that they're challenged with. So the premise that somehow one or the other 100% of the time will be able to meet the mark, for instance, in tight alleyways, multifamily dwelling units where we have access problems, is commonplace. And as I shared earlier, the way you deal with that is effective pre-fire attack planning, which we're sorely lacking here. And so one of the strategic goals that we have here is we need to develop those plans in those areas that we know we're going to have a challenge getting in and out of. That's a very common. It's not isolated to Hemet. Everywhere. I'm sure Greg could comment on San Diego had the same issues. I know in the 23 jurisdictions that we covered at OCFA, the same issues. We had hills that the Quint or the TDA couldn't get up we had apartment complexes that they couldn't get in. So you count on having that pre-fire attack plan to pre-plan that response and to mitigate the incident accordingly.
Don?
I have a quick question. So when I'm looking at these pictures, it doesn't look like the Quint is larger than the truck. But I thought I heard in the report. What? What? Continue with your question. So it made it sound like in the report that the Quint was, yeah, sidebar. The Quint was more or less able, or
I'm not sure if the picture that we have there are variants of the Quint, single axle, dual axle. You could have a.
the picture I see there, the Quint looks much shorter than the truck.
Right, the truck is a longer vehicle type. It's longer, yeah. And the Quint is slightly larger than an engine, but the common.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
where. Okay,
Right.
maybe that's where I.
And that's driven by whether it's one axle, two axle, but the purpose of showing you the difference is the Quint has a water tank. It's mandated by NFPA standards to have a water tank, pumping capability, hose, equipment, and all that.
Well, the fact that it's heavier, wouldn't the fact that it's shorter enable it to get a maneuver better, or is at the wheelbase? It's the wheel issues, right?
Greg, would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, so.
I just see it in person, I guess.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and the tractor drawn aerial with the tiller, that rear compartment, that has a second set of wheels that steer. So what makes that larger, longer vehicle more maneuverable is the fact that there's somebody in the back seat that's steering.
Okay.
So you got two steering wheels.
And I will mention on that note that to be proficient on that vehicle type, the TDA that we have currently, unfortunately, we've incurred nearly $17,000 worth of damage that have been non-incident related as a result of operator error. There are a wide variety of things that cause the accidents to occur. The goal is to not repeat those. But the problem with our current staffing, just on the day-to-day, we don't staff that day-to-day. And for our firefighters to be proficient and to be absolutely razor sharp on the use of that equipment, you need to be on that equipment using it every single day. So there's some economies of scale with the Quint. It doesn't obviously have a tiller. There's some economies of scale in what that means in terms of the training. Truck, I will say the truck function has been and continues to be one of our critical needs here in our city. We need to change what we're doing because the truck is important. We have some options. I've been approached by Chief Patterson from Saboba to look at entering into an agreement for the use of their truck. Not to replace our need, but to augment. If we have a major incident of any magnitude at the hospital, that I think Mayor Brown, you were at the annual readiness drill for the hospital. That requires at least any fire there, at least 4 trucks minimum. So we're going to require some heavy lift from our surrounding partner agencies to support that effort.
Okay, I understand that.
Harlan?
Well, I have a fun question for you. I used to work at Valley Fishing Home, 155 North Girard. So how does this Quint go through there? Because I've seen the ladder truck.
I don't believe they were on our study, but we can, again, as I indicated.
The wall to wall, what's the radius, the turn radius on that Quint?
I don't have that spec in front of me, but we certainly could do that and show you. And I would get back to if for instance, for the discussion, the North Girard address was an issue, then that warrants a pre-attack plan. And that's probably the most important thing that's come out of all this is that we lack pre-attack planning for that purpose. So I appreciate the question, and certainly I'll get back to you on the detail and turning radius specs and all that, but I use that as an example. If, in fact, we had an access issue there, then that would be addressed with good, adequate pre-fire planning.
I guess my comments are to council, and I think this still goes back to policy. And purchasing a new ladder truck has never been on any plan. It's not been in a CIP. It's not been on the Measure U plan. And we're supposed to set policy. The council that approved the ladder truck at the time, I don't know if you were there, Linda, I wasn't.
Many years before I came on board.
That was a policy decision that they made. And so, being the fact that I think we have the specs in here, 37,611 miles on that truck. I mean, there's going to always be options to look at, but we're not in a place to spend $1.2 million. And it hasn't been part of our plan, any of our plans. I mean, I haven't heard this. And so I understand we're trying to address a staffing issue, but it's unfortunate that our staff has gone to all this trouble to put together all of this and do all this work when we really haven't given direction to change our staffing plan or our equipment plan. Nobody's mentioned the fact that the ladder on this thing is 25 feet shorter and does not reach the top of the hospital. And so I think that's a problem. Are definitely like the most versatile, just regular engines, and cheaper to replace. That is a fact. Based on this report of our worst to best, we have real problems that need to be fixed. So, I mean, I guess at our level, we need to decide, like, are we going to put out money for something that, I mean, how many calls do we get a year for the truck? How many calls has the truck gone?
I don't have that in front of me, but
I'll
I can
give
get
you the
those.
answer. It's
Okay.
about 270 a year. That might be a high number. 270. And is that worth?
If you can give me the time, I'll give you the exact number here because it's located in our report.
But my point is for council is that, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's neat and it's innovative, but maybe at the end of the life of one of the ladder truck, we might want to look into something like that.
But don't you do a study in order to identify issues that need to be addressed or that are lacking in performance? And so it takes that study to understand that there is in fact a need. And at that point,
Yeah, if you want to do it on your own and take direction upon yourself. Sure.
no, I'm talking as a council, Carly. I'm not talking as a.
But we haven't given direction and it's already been done.
No, but I'm saying that once a study is done, that actually starts the process of determining whether or not a policy has to be created in order to.
Well, the policy has already been created because we already have a CIP and we have a Measure U plan that is a living document that is apparently changed whenever we want. And, oh, do we vote on it? Because I don't think we've ever voted on it.
Voted on what?
The Measure U plan. That keeps changing. So if we're going to set policy, let's set it. If we're not, and we're going to let people just take the ball and run with it, it's just, we've got to be careful as a council. Yes, we do.
Can I comment on your comments? Because believe it or not, I agree with you on many of the points you said. I'm confused, though, as to what recommended action is to be for us tonight, because part of the presentation that we received is different than the staff